interview
with Harry
about how dark your baby is going to be?
potentially and what that would mean or look like.
Ooh.
Prince Harry just admitted it. There was no racist comment about Archie's skin, and he says Meghan twisted it all. After years of silence, exile, and a family torn apart, Prince Harry, on the eve of his 40th birthday, has reportedly dropped the bombshell we all suspected. The explosive racism claim that rocked the royal family was a distortion. He says no one in the palace ever made a racist remark about Archie, and that Meghan twisted casual questions into accusations. Now, insiders say he sees the Oprah interview as a manipulation tactic, one that permanently shattered his ties with his father, his brother, and the monarchy. But what led to this sudden confession? Why now? And what does this mean for the truth behind one of the most damaging royal scandals in modern history? Stay tuned. This story isn't just shocking. It changes everything. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. It was a moment few saw coming. Not with the media whirlwind that had followed him for decades, not with the carefully controlled image his team had worked tirelessly to sculpt in the post-royal years. And certainly not after the explosive Oprah Winfrey interview that cast shadows so long they seemed destined to remain unchallenged forever. But here we are, a full circle later, as Prince Harry, once the darling rebel of the monarchy, now a complex figure of international scrutiny, finally breaks the silence with words no one expected to hear. There was never a racist comment about Archie's skin. The statement, quiet in tone but seismic in implication, instantly triggered a media firestorm. And not because it shocked the press, many had suspected the story's cracks for years, but because of what it confirmed. That behind the emotional curtain call of the Oprah interview, behind the careful pauses and insinuations that stirred so much global outrage, there may have been something else entirely: manipulation. What does this mean for the royal family? For Meghan Markle? For the millions who saw that 2021 interview and believed, without hesitation, that racism was tearing the crown from within? The confession from Prince Harry isn't just another tabloid headline. It's an unraveling, a reckoning, a possible rewriting of one of the most consequential narratives in recent royal history. Let's take a step back. It's 2021. The world is in the middle of a global pandemic, and tensions around race and privilege are reaching critical mass. When Oprah's sit-down with Harry and Meghan aired, it wasn't just entertainment, it was a cultural bombshell. Meghan described mental health struggles. She cried. She hinted, with unmistakable precision, that someone within the royal family had raised concerns over the potential skin color of her then-unborn son, Archie. The reaction was instant and visceral. Headlines across the world blared accusations of institutional racism in Buckingham Palace. Meghan was heralded as a whistleblower. Harry appeared pained, backing her claims and echoing grievances of mistreatment and neglect. The monarchy was thrown into PR chaos. And public opinion, particularly in the United States, turned definitively against the firm. But now, at age 40, Harry seems to be walking it all back. In private remarks that have since surfaced in multiple international outlets, he acknowledges that the infamous claim may not have been grounded in reality after all. That no one, in fact, made a racist comment. That Meghan had, in his words, twisted casual questions into accusations. It's a stunning reversal. And it forces everyone, journalists, historians, political analysts, and viewers, to re-examine what really happened in that interview, behind palace gates, in between Harry and Meghan themselves. The timing of this confession is important. In recent years, Harry has grown increasingly isolated, not just from the monarchy, but, reportedly, from Meghan herself. Insiders have long hinted at tensions brewing behind the scenes. The once glossy image of the Sussexes as a united front has, in many ways, dulled. Their public appearances are fewer. Their Netflix and Spotify ventures, though lucrative, have been dogged by accusations of exaggeration and opportunism. So why now? Why would Harry choose this moment, of all moments, to confess that the racism claim that once shook the monarchy to its core might not have been true? One theory is emotional fatigue. Another is guilt. Or perhaps the realization that relationships he once cast aside, namely with his father, King Charles, and brother, Prince William, were lost not due to misunderstandings, but because of intentional deceit. And if that deceit came from the very person he gave up his royal life for, what does that mean for his future? We'll explore that. But let's be clear. This story isn't about painting Meghan Markle as a villain or Harry as a helpless pawn. It's about context, about what happens when personal grievance intersects with global platform, about how one interview, one insinuation can reshape public opinion, fuel racial discourse, and fracture a family dynasty already stretched thin by scandal and tradition. In the coming chapters, we will unpack it all. From the original interview that captivated the world, to the palace's muted yet strategic response. From body language experts dissecting every pause and blink, to former palace aides offering their recollections of what was really said in those private rooms. We'll look at Harry's own emotional arc, from royal son to outcast prince to reluctant truth-teller. We'll also ask difficult questions. Was Meghan misunderstood, or was she knowingly weaponizing public sympathy? Did Harry truly believe the claims at the time, or was he swept up in a narrative he dared not challenge? What role did media play in amplifying the message, and do journalists have a responsibility to revisit stories when facts change? You'll also hear from voices you haven't heard before, royal historians, communications experts, cultural commentators, all trying to make sense of how a single phrase during a televised interview may have triggered a cultural avalanche. This isn't just a royal family matter. This is about how quickly the world moves from sympathy to judgment, about how once trusted figures fall from grace and how hard, if not impossible, it is to recover. It's about race, power, marriage, and truth in an age of clickbait and outrage. This story matters because it wasn't just watched, it was believed. And now, that belief is being challenged. So stay with us as we walk through a detailed, scene-by-scene retelling of one of the most controversial chapters in modern royal history. In the end, you may find your opinion has shifted, or that the truth, as always, is far messier than the headlines suggest. This is more than gossip. It's the anatomy of a lie, or the misunderstanding of the century. And when it all comes full circle, we'll ask one final question. If Meghan twisted the truth, as Harry now claims, what else might she have twisted? Are you ready to know what really happened? It was a cool evening on March 7, 2021, when the world paused. For the first time since stepping down from their royal duties, Prince Harry and Meghan Markle sat across from Oprah Winfrey, poised in a lush California garden setting. The atmosphere was tranquil, the setting picturesque. But what was about to unfold would be anything but peaceful. In a conversation that would quickly become one of the most viewed and dissected interviews of the decade, Meghan unleashed a series of claims that would send shockwaves through Buckingham Palace, the British press, and millions of viewers around the world. At the core of the controversy was one deeply disturbing revelation, that a member of the royal family had expressed concern about what their unborn son's skin color might be. It was a vague statement, strategically delivered, but it packed an explosive punch. Meghan said, without naming names, that while she was pregnant with Archie, there were concerns and conversations about how dark his skin might be when he's born. Oprah, stunned, echoed what viewers around the globe were thinking. What? She asked, leaning in. Who said that? Meghan refused to name the individual, stating that it would be very damaging to the person in question. Later in the interview, Harry echoed the concern but also sidestepped the opportunity to name the individual. He confirmed that the conversation had happened and said it took place early on, before Archie was born, but he too refused to reveal who had made the remark. In those few moments, a narrative was born that the royal family, an institution long accused of being outdated, elitist, and emotionally distant, was also racist. The reaction was immediate and intense. British and international news outlets ran breaking coverage. Social media erupted. Politicians, celebrities, and activists weighed in. The story dominated headlines for weeks. But let's pause here and go back to what was actually said, and more importantly, what wasn't. The Oprah interview was a masterclass in emotional performance, strategic omission, and narrative framing. Meghan detailed her mental health struggles, her feelings of isolation, and the lack of support she said she received from the palace. She revealed that at one point, she didn't want to be alive anymore, and claimed she went to the institution for help and was denied. Then came the claim about Archie's title. She insisted that the palace had denied her son a title and security because of his skin color. But critics and constitutional experts quickly pointed out that under royal protocols, great-grandchildren of the monarch are not automatically given titles unless the queen, or now king, designates otherwise. Archie, they noted, was never entitled to be a prince at birth, and that similar policies had been applied to other royal children. Still, facts didn't matter in those first days after the interview. The emotional weight of Meghan's words and the dramatic delivery overwhelmed public scrutiny. In the age of viral narratives and hashtag activism, perception quickly replaced verification. The quote about concerns regarding Archie's skin color was all people remembered. And that quote began to shape a new perception of the royal family. It also deepened the wedge between the Sussexes and the institution they had left behind. Prince William, when approached by a reporter days later, made an uncharacteristically direct statement. "We are very much not a racist family." But by then, the damage had been done. The interview didn't just accuse the monarchy of racism, it painted a picture of a cold, unsympathetic, and antiquated institution unwilling to protect or support a biracial woman marrying into the family. It placed the British press and tabloid culture in the spotlight as well, with Meghan accusing them of racial bias and targeted harassment. She drew comparisons between her experience and that of Princess Diana, evoking public memory and sympathy. For Harry, the interview marked a point of no return. He spoke about his father, then Prince Charles, saying he had stopped taking his calls. He opened up about feeling trapped, how his family had cut them off financially, and how Meghan saved him from a toxic system. He admitted to being hurt by his brother William, but insisted that he loved him deeply. The interview was designed to make it appear that Meghan was the outsider unfairly persecuted, while Harry was the prince who sacrificed everything for love. But something was off. As analysts, commentators, and royal experts began to comb through the claims in the days and weeks following the broadcast, contradictions emerged. The timeline of events, the royal protocol around titles, the alleged refusal to help with mental health, each was called into question. Palace insiders said Meghan never made a formal request for help. Records allegedly showed that Archie would be eligible for a title when Charles ascended the throne. And some suggested that Meghan's interpretation of certain conversations may have reflected personal sensitivity rather than real malice. And yet, the most sensitive claim, the one about race, was treated as untouchable. Who could question such a charge without being labeled dismissive of racism or complicit in bigotry? Until now. Fast forward to the present, and Prince Harry's recent statements shift the entire foundation of the Oprah interview. In private discussions reportedly leaked by a former confidant, Harry is said to have acknowledged that the comment about Archie's skin color was not what Meghan made it sound like. He clarified that the original conversation was casual and speculative, not malicious or racist. According to the reports, Harry admitted that someone had casually mentioned what the baby might look like, something that many families, across cultures and races, have joked or wondered about. But Meghan, he now suggests, saw an opportunity. She twisted casual questions into accusations, Harry reportedly said. If true, this isn't a small clarification. It's a seismic shift. It means that the entire moral framing of the Oprah interview, the emotional backbone of the Sussexes' global sympathy, was built on misrepresentation. Not necessarily a full-blown lie, but an exaggeration powerful enough to damage reputations, end relationships, and alter global perceptions of the British royal family. Critics have long questioned the authenticity of Meghan and Harry's narrative. But until Harry's own voice began to turn against the story, there was little room for doubt in mainstream circles. Now, everything is up for review. What makes this even more extraordinary is that Harry himself had once fiercely defended Meghan's version of events. For years, he refused to allow anyone, including his own family, to contradict her. He cut ties, stayed silent amid backlash, and let the assumption of racism hang over the palace like a storm cloud. Why? Was he afraid of confronting Meghan? Was he so eager to escape the royal system that he clung to the narrative she created? Or did he simply not realize how far the claims had gone until much later? We'll explore all of this as the story unfolds. But for now, we return to the interview itself, not just as a media event, but as a case study in how modern scandals are built. It wasn't just what Meghan said, it was how she said it. The pregnant pauses, the wide eyes, the quivering voice, the theatrical ambience Oprah helped orchestrate. It was a story told with precision and emotional weight, designed not only to inform, but to persuade. And it worked, at least for a while. Now, as Harry begins to unravel that story, the public is forced to reconsider everything. Did the Oprah interview mislead us? Was the royal family unfairly condemned? And most importantly, can Harry be trusted now that he's reversing course? The story gets more complicated from here, and also more revealing. When Meghan Markle dropped the explosive allegation that a member of the royal family had voiced concern about her unborn son's skin color, the public's gaze immediately turned toward Buckingham Palace. The monarchy, already under pressure from modern expectations and generational change, was thrust into a race-related controversy on a scale not seen in recent royal history. But what exactly happened behind closed doors at the palace before, during, and after Meghan's pregnancy? What did members of the family really say? What context has remained buried under the weight of viral soundbites and polarizing headlines? To understand what truly occurred, we must go beyond the television interview and into the day-to-day life at the palace in the months leading up to Archie's birth in May 2019. Sources close to the family, including former staff members and aides who have remained largely anonymous due to non-disclosure agreements, have gradually begun to share pieces of the puzzle. Their accounts, while varied, begin to reveal a strikingly different picture from the one Meghan portrayed. According to one senior aide who worked at Kensington Palace during Harry and Meghan's tenure, conversations about the upcoming royal baby were frequent and wide-ranging. There was excitement, the aide recalled. There was also curiosity, like there would be in any family, about who the baby might take after. Would it have Harry's red hair? Meghan's eyes? That sort of thing. The aide insists that no one expressed concern about skin color in a negative or prejudicial way. It was no different than someone saying, "I wonder if the baby will have the Windsor nose." Another palace source described a specific moment during a private family gathering where someone, in a light-hearted tone, mused about the baby's possible complexion. The context, the source says, was clearly casual, an innocent remark lost in the ebb and flow of conversation. It was not a statement of fear. It was just an offhand remark, and it was said in the same way someone might wonder aloud about whether a baby will be left-handed or tall. These testimonies seem to align with what Prince Harry is now privately admitting, that Meghan may have taken a benign moment and reframed it as something sinister. But why would she do that? And how did the palace respond in the immediate aftermath of the Oprah interview? It's important to understand the culture within royal institutions. The monarchy, bound by tradition and protocol, does not respond to every public accusation. Silence, more often than not, is the chosen path. The Queen's now famous statement after the Oprah interview, "Recollections may vary," was as close to a rebuke as Buckingham Palace ever gets. But behind that carefully worded sentence was a whirlwind of emotion and conflict. In the days following the broadcast, courtiers scrambled to assess damage, coordinate with public relations teams, and manage internal morale. One palace official recalled the sheer disbelief that overtook the royal household. Everyone was asking the same question: who supposedly said this? No one could remember any such conversation, and certainly not one framed in the way Meghan described. More striking, however, is the claim made by a former household member who says that staff had long feared Meghan would go nuclear if she felt cornered. There were signs, the source said. She would push boundaries, question traditions, and sometimes treat staff with disdain. Some felt that she was constantly looking for offense. Whether or not that's fair, the reality is that multiple staff members have since come forward, some through sanctioned royal books, others in confidential interviews, describing moments where Meghan's interpretation of events sharply clashed with how others remembered them. For instance, during the planning of the royal wedding, several aides reported friction around issues of protocol, hierarchy, and treatment of staff. One aide famously claimed Meghan made Kate Middleton cry, contradicting Meghan's own version that it was Kate who made her cry. In time, palace insiders began referring to this phenomenon as the Meghan version of events, a narrative that was polished and sometimes detached from what others experienced. Prince Harry, once shielded from much of this internal friction by his affection and loyalty to Meghan, now seems to be reassessing those moments with fresh eyes. One of the most telling pieces of information to surface recently comes from a well-placed source in Clarence House who claims that Charles, now King Charles, was deeply wounded by the racism claim. He was devastated, the source said, not just because of the accusation, but behind closed doors, Charles reportedly met with key advisors and communications staff, trying to determine how to respond. Ultimately, it was decided that a formal statement would be counterproductive. The Queen, who still held reign at the time, believed in maintaining dignity through restraint. Never complain, never explain had long been the family's mantra, and deviating from it could set a dangerous precedent. But not everyone agreed. According to insiders, Prince William was furious. He wanted to defend the family more aggressively, one aide said. He felt that silence was being interpreted as guilt. This disagreement reportedly caused a brief strategic rift between William and the rest of the palace leadership. William wanted to address the allegations directly, possibly through a televised appearance. Others feared that doing so would escalate tensions and create a tit-for-tat media war. Meanwhile, Meghan and Harry, buoyed by the international response, pressed forward with interviews, media deals, and public statements that reaffirmed their original claims. But within the palace, there was growing skepticism and resentment. Aides who had once worked closely with the couple began to leak bits of information, cautiously at first, then more openly through third-party books and documentaries. In one instance, a former staffer recounted a meeting where Meghan allegedly said, "I know how to play this game." The comment, though ambiguous, was interpreted by some as a sign that she understood how public perception worked and wasn't above using it to her advantage. Notably, there was never an internal investigation into who made the supposed racist comment. Why? Because no one ever came forward to say such a comment existed in the first place. It was like chasing shadows, said one palace official. There was no record, no recollection, no evidence. And that's where the story starts to come undone. If no one can remember the comment, and Harry himself now suggests it didn't happen as reported, why was it allowed to fester for so long? Why didn't Harry speak up sooner? There's a theory inside the palace, whispered among insiders, but rarely stated publicly, that Harry felt trapped. He had distanced himself from his family, moved to America, launched a new life built partially on the narrative of victimhood. To walk back such a central claim would have seemed like betrayal, not just of Meghan, but of everything he had publicly stood for in the years following their royal exit. But time changes things. Perspectives shift. And as the reality of isolation, strained finances, and dwindling public support sets in, Harry appears to be reconsidering the cost of silence. His recent confession, however private and belated, suggests a man burdened by regret. It's also possible that Harry only recently learned the full truth. One royal insider believes that Harry might have genuinely misunderstood the original conversation at the time and accepted Meghan's version without question. He was in love. He was angry. He was exhausted. That's a potent mix, said the source. He may not have realized the magnitude of what was said or not said until much later. Now, as he begins to unpack those memories, the truth becomes harder to ignore. And the palace, long silent on the matter, watches closely. As we peel back the layers, we begin to understand how a single ambiguous conversation, twisted or misremembered, could evolve into a global scandal. What separates misunderstanding from manipulation? This is the question now surrounding the most consequential accusation Meghan Markle made during her infamous 2021 interview with Oprah Winfrey, an accusation that has echoed throughout the royal family, media circuits, and political discourse ever since. If Prince Harry is now claiming that the racism allegations against the royal family were based on a distortion of casual remarks, the natural follow-up is, was it an innocent miscommunication, or was Meghan intentionally manipulating the truth to serve a deeper purpose? To answer this, we must look closely at the nature of the conversation in question, as well as Meghan's history of shaping narratives. Language is complex, especially within personal relationships. It is influenced by tone, context, assumptions, and emotion. A single phrase can mean one thing to the speaker and something entirely different to the listener, particularly when emotions are heightened and trust is thin. Several insiders now assert that the original comment, which Meghan interpreted as racially motivated, was a casual musing, perhaps even said in jest. Multiple unnamed sources from within the palace recount that the remark occurred during an informal gathering, possibly around a dinner or family discussion, where someone simply wondered what the baby might look like. It was a passing thought, not a statement of worry or judgment, one former aide shared. It was no different than someone saying, "Do you think the baby will inherit Harry's red hair?" These kinds of remarks are common in families expecting children, questions about features, personality, resemblance. So how did this one comment transform into a scandal of global proportions? The answer lies, at least in part, in Meghan's reaction. According to those familiar with the situation, Meghan was quick to interpret the remark through a lens of exclusion. She had already felt like an outsider within the royal system, said one source. She was looking for signs that confirmed her fear that she wasn't welcome. That may have colored her perception and led her to believe that what was said, though benign in nature, carried a deeper, darker meaning. But others believe there was more to it than that. A pattern, they argue, began to emerge over time. Meghan would take seemingly ordinary interactions and, when convenient, recast them in a way that portrayed her as mistreated or misunderstood. In her dealings with staff, she often framed critique as disrespect. In private family conversations, routine questions were reinterpreted as subtle attacks. It was as if everything that didn't go her way became a slight, said a former palace official. Eventually, people became afraid to speak around her. This framing is bolstered by several public instances where Meghan's version of events later came under scrutiny. One of the most talked about examples involved the lead-up to her wedding. Meghan claimed that Kate Middleton had made her cry during a disagreement about flower girl dresses. Later reporting suggested the opposite may have been true, that Meghan had reduced Kate to tears. Even though the public never received a conclusive answer, the discrepancy highlighted a recurring issue. Meghan's memory or portrayal of events often contradicted that of others involved. This brings us back to the racism allegation. If Meghan had already adopted a defensive posture toward the royal family, it is not inconceivable that a neutral comment about Archie's possible complexion could be received as offensive or threatening. But does that justify turning it into a worldwide scandal? Body language experts who analyzed the Oprah interview noted Meghan's deliberate pauses, emphasis, and carefully chosen phrasing. She never said the royal family was racist, yet she heavily implied it. She allowed the audience to arrive at that conclusion organically. This technique of withholding key details while encouraging a specific interpretation is not uncommon in political interviews or legal testimony. It allows the speaker to avoid direct accountability while still shaping public perception. When Oprah asked, "Who said that?" Meghan replied, "There were several conversations." Later, when pressed again, she refused to name names, citing the potential harm it could cause. This served two purposes. First, it preserved plausible deniability. Second, it ensured that the cloud of suspicion remained over the entire royal family. As one commentator noted at the time, if you accuse someone of racism and then refuse to say who, you've essentially accused everyone. It worked. The public conversation immediately shifted toward guessing who the culprit might be. Speculation ran rampant. Was it Prince Charles? Princess Anne? Even Prince William? Each theory came with its own set of biases and assumptions, all fueled by Meghan's calculated vagueness. If this was a manipulation tactic, it was executed with devastating effectiveness. But to understand the full picture, we must consider Harry's role. At the time of the interview, Harry seemed to back Meghan's claims. He confirmed that there had been conversations, though he too avoided identifying anyone. What's now emerging, however, is that Harry may not have been entirely sure what was said or how to interpret it. He was in a fragile state, emotionally distanced from his family, culturally uprooted, and deeply invested in defending his wife. In that mindset, he may have defaulted to trust. Yet insiders believe Harry did harbor doubts, even back then. According to a family friend, Harry confided in someone shortly after the interview aired, expressing discomfort with how certain topics had been framed. He wasn't comfortable with the racial claim, but he felt it was too late to walk it back, the friend shared. He had gone too far down that road. It's possible that Harry saw Meghan as someone who had suffered greatly through press intrusion, public criticism, and institutional resistance, and believed her version of events because he wanted to protect her. But over time, as the consequences of those claims grew and relationships with his family continued to deteriorate, Harry may have begun to reevaluate everything. One therapist who specializes in high-profile couples and public scandals offered this insight. When people feel cornered or betrayed, they sometimes create narratives to justify their emotional reality. That doesn't necessarily mean they're lying, but it does mean they may amplify certain details or omit others to support the story they need to believe. This theory might explain Meghan's approach. She may not have invented the remark about Archie's skin out of thin air, but she may have chosen to emphasize it in a way that served a larger purpose, framing herself as a victim of a hostile environment. In doing so, she attracted global sympathy, shifted public scrutiny away from other elements of her life, and further solidified her bond with Harry. But now, as Harry reportedly admits that no racist comment was made, the narrative begins to collapse. The public is left to grapple with the uncomfortable possibility that what they believed and defended was not the full truth. This realization has political and social consequences. In the immediate aftermath of the interview, the British monarchy was vilified in many corners of the media, especially in the United States. Campaigns were launched. Debates on systemic racism were reignited. Editorials decried the royal institution as archaic and exclusionary. If that entire movement was sparked by a manipulated story, what does that say about the media's role? About the responsibility of public figures to tell the truth? It also raises questions about accountability. Will Meghan address the discrepancy now that Harry has recanted? Or will she double down, framing the situation as a difference in perspective rather than a falsehood? Will the media that once championed her story revisit their coverage and issue corrections? Or will they quietly move on, hoping the public forgets? In an age where narratives are currency and victimhood often translates into power, Meghan's ability to present herself as the wrong party granted her significant cultural capital. If it turns out that this was at least partially constructed, the implications are far-reaching. This doesn't mean racism doesn't exist in the monarchy or in British society at large. But it does mean that specific claims must be scrutinized with the same vigor as any other. Emotional resonance should not override factual accuracy. And when truth emerges later, even if it's inconvenient, it must be acknowledged. So where does this leave us? It leaves us with a more complicated story than the one originally told. It suggests that what was presented as an unambiguous act of racism may have been a personal interpretation, one shaped by insecurity, fear, or strategy. It paints Harry as a man caught between love and legacy, possibly realizing too late that he allowed personal loyalty to cloud his judgment. And it forces Meghan to face the possibility that her story, once embraced by millions, may now be questioned at its core. In the wake of the Oprah interview, the public perception of Prince Harry shifted dramatically. No longer the cheeky prince or the tragic son walking behind his mother's coffin, he was now seen as the husband who had rejected the traditions of his birthright to defend the woman he loved. For many, it was romantic, heroic even. But behind the scenes, that loyalty came at a devastating cost. Harry wasn't just breaking protocol or leaving behind royal duties. He was severing bonds that had anchored him since childhood. He was stepping away from the only life he had ever known, into a world that often viewed him through a transactional lens. This section of the story is not about media headlines or palace reactions. It's about Harry himself. What happens to a man when he becomes increasingly isolated, not just from his family, but from the institutions and emotional anchors that once shaped his identity? What happens when loyalty to one person, however justified, leads to estrangement from everyone else? Harry's departure from the royal family was framed as a joint decision, but insiders suggest it was far more complicated. Those close to the situation say that Harry, while frustrated with the institution, had no real plan for life outside the firm. According to a friend from his time in the army, Harry began voicing doubts just weeks after the move to California. He told me it felt like jumping out of a plane without a parachute, the friend said. He missed structure. He missed family. But he didn't feel he could go back. This emotional tug-of-war is at the heart of Harry's journey in the months and years after Megxit. Torn between his wife's grievances and his own deep-rooted ties to his family, Harry became a man suspended between two worlds. Meghan was his present and future, but his past, his brother, his father, even his grandmother, remained an unhealed wound. Loyalty to Meghan was not passive. It required active and public alignment. When she made the racism claim, Harry had to support it. Silence would have been seen as betrayal. When she discussed suicidal thoughts and alleged neglect, he had to validate her experience. And when media outlets questioned the veracity of her statements, Harry's role was to shield her, not scrutinize her. He was all in, said a former royal protection officer. Even when it didn't make sense, even when people close to him raised concerns, he defended her with everything he had. This uncompromising loyalty came at a price. According to multiple sources, Harry's communication with Prince William dwindled to almost nothing following the Oprah interview. There were efforts to reconcile in the days after Prince Philip's funeral in 2021, but insiders say they fell flat. William was livid, not just about the racism accusation, but about the insinuation that the entire family had neglected Meghan's mental health. He felt ambushed, one palace aide recalled, and he believed Harry had abandoned the family without warning. Even more strained was Harry's relationship with his father. Prince Charles, then the Prince of Wales, was deeply wounded. Privately, he told advisors he was confused and heartbroken by the interview. He reportedly questioned whether Harry still wanted a relationship at all or if he had burned the bridge entirely in pursuit of a new identity. He felt like he didn't recognize his own son anymore, a family friend said. And that hurt more than any public scandal. What's clear is that Harry, for all the public support he received, was emotionally isolated. He was no longer part of the royal inner circle. His relationships with longtime friends and military comrades began to fray. Some friends found themselves caught in the middle, unsure whether to stay loyal to the crown or to their friend who now lived thousands of miles away, in a foreign land, with a new set of values and priorities. Even within his new environment in the United States, the transition wasn't easy. Despite lucrative deals with Netflix, Spotify, and publishers, Harry reportedly struggled with a sense of purpose. Public appearances often emphasized his past, his royal title, his family drama, his memoir. He became known more for what he had walked away from than what he was building. As Meghan began to shape their narrative through documentaries and interviews, Harry's voice seemed to recede. He was present, yes, but reactive. Supporting her claims, mirroring her emotions, reinforcing her worldview. The man who once had a deep bond with his brother and a loyal relationship with his grandmother was now seen as a stranger within his own lineage. In private moments, according to reports from close associates, Harry began to express quiet doubts. He started to question if all of it was worth it, said one friend. He didn't regret leaving the institution, but he wondered if the way it all played out had been a mistake. That maybe he had gone too far, said too much. These doubts reportedly intensified after the birth of his daughter, Lilibet. Naming her after the Queen, while seen by some as an olive branch, struck others as a manipulative move, claiming royal symbolism while criticizing the very institution it represented. Internally, Harry began to feel the tension of duality, trying to be part of a royal legacy while building a brand that revolved around separating from it. And yet, through it all, his loyalty to Meghan remained strong, at least on the surface. In public, he defended her choices, echoed her frustrations, and protected her against criticism. But in private, cracks began to form. Close friends noted a shift in tone, a weariness in his voice when discussing ongoing legal battles, media scrutiny, and public backlash. He seemed tired, one associate said. Not just physically, soul tired. These emotional undercurrents laid the groundwork for what would become his quiet admission about the racism claim. By the time he finally acknowledged that no racist comment had been made, Harry was no longer the newlywed defending his wife at all costs. He was a father, a man approaching middle age, carrying the weight of broken relationships and public doubt. The cost of loyalty had been high, and now the question remained, was it justified? This scene is not about condemning Harry for standing by Meghan. It's about understanding the emotional and psychological toll that unwavering loyalty can take when it's not balanced by critical reflection. It's about the isolation that comes from being a bridge between two worlds, and how that isolation can eventually force a person to face truths they once tried to avoid. It wasn't a single moment that led to Prince Harry's private admission about the racism claim. Rather, it was a slow, almost imperceptible shift, like a tide pulling back from the shore, revealing what had always been hidden beneath. Over time, doubt began to creep in. Questions he once refused to ask himself started whispering louder in the quiet moments. Was everything Meghan said true? Had he been too quick to believe? Too loyal to challenge? The turning point did not arrive in the form of a confrontation or argument. It came quietly, steadily, in the form of observation. Life in California was supposed to be freeing, liberating from the rigid rules of the royal institution. But instead of feeling unburdened, Harry began to feel displaced. He had traded castles for luxury compounds, press photographers for Netflix cameras, and royal advisors for brand managers. Yet somehow, the pressure hadn't gone away. It had simply changed faces. According to multiple insiders close to the Sussex circle, Harry's growing disillusionment began after the couple's Netflix docuseries aired. While Meghan had been deeply involved in the production, approving edits, shaping the tone, guiding the narrative, Harry reportedly felt uneasy with the final cut. He thought it leaned too heavily into victimhood, a source revealed. He felt it made them look weak, rather than empowered. That discomfort grew when the public reaction turned sour. While the docuseries initially attracted massive viewership, it also drew sharp criticism. Viewers began to question the couple's motives, accusing them of hypocrisy, rejecting royal life while profiting from royal connections. Media analysts, once sympathetic, began to pull back. Online sentiment, once adoring, became divided. Harry watched this unfold with a mix of confusion and frustration. He had believed the world would rally around their story. Instead, the response was mixed at best. He began to realize that outside the bubble of curated interviews and scripted documentaries, public perception was no longer on their side. It was during this period, according to a friend, that Harry began revisiting the Oprah interview. He started rewatching clips, the friend said, not just as a viewer, but as someone trying to make sense of how they got here. He saw things differently, things he hadn't noticed before. The clip that haunted him most was the exchange about Archie's skin color. Meghan's wording, Oprah's shock, his own silence. What struck Harry, reportedly, was how easily the narrative had taken root. "We never said anyone was racist," he remembered Meghan saying at one point. Yet that was exactly how the world interpreted it. And neither of them corrected the record. At the time, it seemed justified, necessary even. But now, years later, Harry began to question whether their silence had been ethical or strategic. As he reflected further, conversations from the past resurfaced in his mind, moments he had dismissed or overlooked. A casual remark from his father. A curious question from a senior aide. Nothing malicious. Nothing hateful. Just curiosity, misinterpreted in a tense environment. And yet, that single seed of speculation had grown into a tree of scandal. Around this time, Harry also reconnected with a few old friends from his military days. People who had known him before the spotlight intensified, before the fairy tale soured. Their perspective was different. Candid. Unfiltered. One reportedly asked him bluntly, "Do you really think your family is racist?" It was a jarring question, one that forced Harry to stop and think. Not just emotionally, but logically. Was there real evidence of malice? Or had he believed something because he wanted to protect someone he loved? The more he thought, the more uncomfortable he became. There were also increasing whispers from within the Sussex team. While most of their public-facing staff remained loyal, some behind-the-scenes voices raised quiet concerns. An editor who worked on Meghan's podcast project allegedly questioned the consistency of some of her anecdotes. A production assistant on the Netflix series reportedly flagged storylines that didn't align with earlier recordings. These weren't accusations, but they were red flags. And Harry was noticing them. At home, the atmosphere was shifting as well. Friends of the couple say that Harry and Meghan began to argue more, not explosively, but with tension that hadn't been there before. Harry was asking questions, and Meghan didn't always appreciate them. According to one insider, Meghan dismissed his doubts by saying, "You were there. You heard it too." But Harry's memory, now cleared of the haze of emotional exhaustion, was telling him something else. Then came the crucial moment. A private meeting with a therapist he had been seeing regularly since moving to the United States. During this session, Harry reportedly admitted that the racism claim might have been exaggerated. Not a lie, exactly, but not the truth either. The therapist encouraged him to explore that possibility further. What would it mean if he had supported a story that wasn't fully accurate? How would it impact his identity, his values, his relationships? Harry didn't have answers, but he began to open up. From there, the change was gradual but visible. He became more reflective in interviews, careful with his language. In private, he began to express regret, not about leaving the royal family, but about how he left. He wished he had handled it differently, said one associate. He wished he had asked more questions, trusted less blindly. Eventually, those private reflections spilled into trusted circles. In one conversation, recounted by someone present, Harry said, "There was never a racist comment about Archie's skin. It was blown out of proportion, and I didn't correct it because I didn't want to start a fight." That moment marked the true turning point, not just in terms of narrative, but in terms of accountability. Harry had, for the first time, taken ownership of his role in perpetuating a damaging story. He didn't blame Meghan outright, but he no longer stood in full defense. His confession rippled quickly through private channels. Palace insiders were notified. Advisors began preparing for the possibility that Harry might one day go public. Some saw it as a breakthrough, others as too little too late. The public hasn't heard this version of events yet, but the story is slowly leaking, bit by bit. And if Harry ever decides to speak openly, the fallout will be massive. Not just for Meghan, not just for the royal family, but for every journalist, public figure, and institution that ran with a story without knowing the full context. It was a conversation that wasn't meant to be public. A private moment, unguarded, unrehearsed, and almost offhand. Yet it may go down as one of the most significant revelations Prince Harry has ever made. There was no stage, no media fanfare, no Oprah or Netflix cameras rolling this time. Just a small circle of confidence, a quiet room, and a weary voice breaking under the weight of years of internal conflict. The moment came during a low-key gathering held at a friend's home in Montecito. Among the few guests were individuals Harry trusted implicitly, people not connected to the media, not on any corporate payroll, and not in Meghan's immediate orbit. It was this detachment from influence and public scrutiny that allowed Harry to speak candidly for the first time in a very long while. According to two individuals who were present, both of whom spoke under condition of anonymity to avoid media backlash, Harry had been unusually introspective that evening. Conversation had started casually, touching on family, children, and the evolving nature of public life. But as the wine flowed and the mood deepened, the topic of the Oprah interview surfaced. There was a long silence. Then Harry spoke. "I have to be honest," he said. "There was never a racist comment about Archie's skin." The words landed with a thud. One of the guests recalled everyone going quiet, unsure of whether Harry meant what they thought he did. He repeated himself, more slowly this time, his voice edged with regret. There was a conversation. But it wasn't what Meghan said it was. Someone asked something like, "I wonder what he'll look like." But it wasn't malicious. It wasn't racist. She twisted it. According to witnesses, Harry didn't sound angry. He didn't accuse Meghan of lying, nor did he paint himself as a victim. Instead, he seemed exhausted, emotionally drained by the burden of carrying a narrative that no longer felt right to him. "I didn't stop it," he continued. "That's on me. I let it grow. I thought defending her meant backing everything she said, but I should have clarified. I should have explained. This confession wasn't shouted, nor did it come out in a rush. It was slow, measured, almost hesitant, like a man unraveling a tightly wound knot he had ignored for too long." It was clear to those present that this wasn't the first time Harry had considered this truth, but it was the first time he had dared to speak it aloud. From the outside, it might be hard to understand why this moment matters so much. After all, people revise or reconsider their views all the time. But in Harry's case, this wasn't just a personal reflection. It was the crumbling of the central pillar that had defined his public identity for the last several years. He had stood on that Oprah stage and lent his silence, his complicity, to a claim that rocked institutions and triggered cultural conversations across continents. To walk it back now isn't just a shift in opinion. It's an act of historical correction, a confession that the outrage, the condemnation, the media storm that engulfed the monarchy might have been based not on truth, but on misinterpretation. The emotional cost of this realization was evident in Harry's demeanor, according to those who heard him. He didn't cry, but his eyes were heavy. He didn't seek forgiveness, but he acknowledged wrongdoing. "I think about my brother a lot," he said at one point. "What this did to him. I think about my dad, too. And the Queen. She went at her grave thinking we accused her family of racism." One of the guests asked if he planned to go public with what he had just said. Harry reportedly shrugged. "I don't know. Maybe someday. But who would believe me now? After everything?" That comment speaks volumes about the corner he feels painted into. For years, Harry's public persona was tightly woven into Meghan's narrative. To disentangle himself now would seem, to many, like betrayal, or worse, like damage control. But that doesn't change the fact that he's speaking differently now. And the quiet way he chose to do it suggests sincerity rather than performance. Following this private confession, word began to trickle out through discreet channels. Journalists close to palace sources began hearing murmurs. Royal aides, particularly those who had worked with Harry in the past, were reportedly not surprised. "We always knew it was overblown," said one former staffer. "But hearing that he finally sees it too? That's significant." The confession also reopens a critical chapter for the royal family. If Harry no longer stands by the most explosive claim made against the institution, it reframes years of tension, estrangement, and reputational damage. William, who has maintained a firm silence since the Oprah interview, is said to be both vindicated and wounded by the news. "It's what he's believed all along," said someone close to the Prince of Wales. But to hear that Harry now sees it too, that's a mix of relief and sorrow. Because it could have come years earlier. For King Charles, the implications are just as profound. The palace's response to the Oprah interview had been restrained but firm. "Recollections may vary," the Queen said in her understated way. Now, it appears that statement was more accurate than the world realized. What happens next is unclear. Will Harry speak publicly about his confession? Will he issue a statement or appear in an interview to clarify the record? Thus far, there's no indication that he intends to do so. And perhaps he won't. Perhaps this moment of truth will remain behind closed doors, shared only with those closest to him. But whether public or private, the significance of the confession cannot be overstated. It marks a potential pivot point, not just for Harry's personal journey, but for the broader cultural narrative surrounding the royal family, race, and accountability. It calls into question the legitimacy of everything that followed from that Oprah interview: the media frenzy, the political reactions, the think pieces, the Netflix deals, the memoir. It also raises questions about Meghan's role going forward. If Harry no longer supports the framing of that key accusation, what does that mean for her? Will she stand by her version of events? Will she address the contradiction? Or will she pivot, reframing the issue once more through a lens of misunderstanding and emotional trauma? One can only speculate. But what's clear is that Harry's confession represents more than a moment of honesty. It is the beginning of reckoning with himself, with his choices, and with the consequences of allowing emotion and loyalty to override truth. When Meghan Markle told Oprah Winfrey that members of the royal family had expressed concerns about her unborn child's skin tone, she didn't name names, but she didn't have to. The accusation was like a match struck in a dry forest. Instantly, the flame spread, not only through tabloid headlines and social media threads, but through the foundations of an institution that had endured centuries of scandal, transformation, and political unrest. What made this moment different was not just the claim, but the timing. The world was already primed for outrage, and the monarchy, long cloaked in tradition and discretion, suddenly found itself under a very modern microscope. Now, with Prince Harry admitting privately that there was never a racist comment about Archie, the damage caused by that original allegation becomes painfully visible. The monarchy suffered not only reputational harm, but also a significant erosion of trust within its own walls, with the public, and among global observers. In the hours following the Oprah interview's broadcast, Buckingham Palace was caught flat-footed. It was rare for the institution to be publicly blindsided, especially in such a high-stakes arena. For an institution known for its tight control over messaging and protocol, the unfiltered nature of the interview was jarring. Suddenly, millions around the world viewed the monarchy through a lens of racial suspicion. International headlines screamed phrases like "royal racism" and "the firm exposed." Activists began calling for an end to the monarchy altogether, arguing that it was a relic of colonial oppression, now confirmed to be racist from the inside out. Behind palace gates, the atmosphere was one of restrained panic. Courtiers rushed to brief senior royals, while private conversations between aides and family members turned into strategic discussions on damage control. Queen Elizabeth, ever the stoic matriarch, insisted that any response be measured and dignified. This resulted in the carefully worded statement released 2 days later. The issues raised, particularly that of race, are concerning. While some recollections may vary, they are taken very seriously and will be addressed by the family privately. That statement, 36 words long, was the full extent of the palace's public response. But inside, the implications were enormous. According to sources, Queen Elizabeth was deeply hurt. She had prided herself on projecting stability and moral authority. The idea that the institution she had safeguarded for 7 decades was now being labeled racist, even implicitly, was devastating. King Charles, then still the Prince of Wales, reportedly took the accusation personally. Though never named, many believed he was the unnamed royal whom Meghan suggested had spoken about Archie's skin. While palace sources denied it, the ambiguity allowed public speculation to flourish. His reputation, already fragile due to years of public scrutiny over his marriage to Princess Diana and other controversies, took a severe hit. Polls showed a sharp dip in public trust toward him, particularly among younger generations and in former Commonwealth nations. William, perhaps the most visibly affected, felt both misrepresented and helpless. As the future king, he bore the brunt of the institution's public image. And yet, constrained by protocol and the palace's policy of discretion, he couldn't speak freely to defend his family or provide clarification. When he was finally cornered by a reporter outside a London school, he offered the brief but firm rebuttal: "We are very much not a racist family." But by then, the narrative had already taken root. For the royal family, the consequences were far-reaching. Inside the palace, trust began to erode. Some senior staff members began resigning or asking for reassignment, unwilling to navigate the stress and scrutiny of post-interview fallout. Others became more guarded in their interactions with press and public engagements, fearful that any comment or action could be misconstrued. The impact was emotional as well as political. Tensions between family members worsened, and efforts at reconciliation were stalled before they could even begin. Externally, the monarchy's relationship with Commonwealth countries, many of which have majority non-white populations, suffered serious blows. Leaders in nations such as Jamaica, Barbados, and Canada began pushing harder for full independence and the removal of the British monarch as head of state. The interview was cited repeatedly in parliamentary debates, media commentary, and grassroots activism. Barbados officially removed the Queen as head of state later that year, a move that had been in progress but gained traction and urgency after the Oprah revelations. In the UK itself, the monarchy's approval ratings among younger and more diverse demographics dropped dramatically. Surveys conducted in the months following the interview showed that while older Britons remained largely loyal to the monarchy, younger citizens, especially those under 30, were questioning its relevance. University discussions, social media commentary, and televised debates began reframing the monarchy as a symbol of inequality, colonialism, and outdated tradition. At the heart of this cultural shift was one simple idea: if the royal family could not be trusted to treat its own members fairly, especially a woman of mixed race, how could it claim to represent the modern, multicultural United Kingdom? The palace, recognizing the seriousness of the moment, made a few subtle changes. It updated its diversity policies, promised internal reviews, and began more active engagement with minority communities across the UK. But the moves were criticized as reactive rather than sincere. Too little, too late. Critics pointed out that these changes only came after the damage was done. And now, Harry's private confession threatens to unearth all those wounds once again, but this time in reverse. If there was no racist comment, or if the comment was misinterpreted, what does that mean for the damage done? The reputations that were tarnished? The relationships that were broken? The perception of the monarchy as an inherently racist institution? Public trust, once lost, is hard to regain. But the impact of false or misleading claims is just as corrosive. The monarchy has always relied on its image as a symbol of unity, stability, and moral leadership. That image was compromised by the racism allegation, and whether true or not, the result was the same: a public turning away from the crown. There is also the matter of precedent. If one accusation could inflict such wide-reaching damage, what prevents future claims, true or not, from causing further harm? The palace now faces the difficult task of re-establishing credibility in a media environment where narratives. The internal consequences were just as severe. Prince William and Prince Harry, once inseparable, now had a chasm between them that felt impossible to bridge. Friends of William say he saw the interview as an act of betrayal, one that deliberately targeted the family's values and legacy. According to insiders, William tried multiple times to reach out to Harry in the months that followed, only to be met with silence or filtered conversations through intermediaries. Those efforts, already strained, may now be permanently fractured given the latest revelations. For King Charles, the betrayal was not just political, it was paternal. Sources close to the monarch say he had quietly hoped for reconciliation, especially after the Queen's death. He believed time and family milestones, such as the coronation and the children's growth, might bring Harry back into the fold. But with the Oprah interview standing as a barrier, those hopes were increasingly dim. Harry's recent admission could reframe the past, but it does not undo the emotional toll already inflicted. There's also the institutional damage. Once a bastion of secrecy and control, the royal family now finds itself forced into a reactive position, constantly defending itself against claims, leaks, and narratives it cannot control. Every statement, every appearance is dissected for hidden meanings and unspoken truths. The institution's ability to rise above the fray, to remain apolitical, distant, and revered, is being challenged like never before. And then there's the broader cultural damage. The monarchy is more than a family, it is a symbol. And that symbol has taken a hit not just in Britain, but globally. For millions around the world, especially in post-colonial countries, the monarchy's image was deeply linked to questions of race, equality, and historical justice. The Oprah interview validated many of their suspicions. If that validation was based on a distorted truth, the implications are profound. Harry's confession doesn't just rewind the clock, it reshuffles the entire deck. But can the monarchy recover from an accusation that was allowed to flourish for years? Can it regain moral authority without appearing vindictive or dismissive? These are the questions the palace must now confront. The next chapter will examine how the false accusation or exaggerated claim impacted Harry's relationship with his brother William, and how this single narrative helped break what was once the strongest sibling bond in modern royal memory. The British royal family has always placed a premium on appearances, stoic composure, elegant diplomacy, and above all, unity. For decades, Princes William and Harry embodied that principle, their bond not just a matter of public fascination but a symbol of post-Diana resilience. After the death of their mother, the world watched the two young princes grow up side by side, attending events, sharing laughs, serving in the military, and eventually standing together at the royal weddings that defined a new generation of Windsors. But beneath that polished surface, things were beginning to fracture long before the public noticed. And by the time the Oprah interview aired in 2021, that fraternal rift was no longer theoretical.